Johanna, shall we start?
Yes, we are in.
She is moderator in.
Go for it.
Okay, is everybody there for him, Kenny?
Yes.
So we can get started?
Yes, I think so. Nasha.
Okay, so let's get started. Sorry?
I think so. Nasha hasn't joined us.
I didn't hear you. Could you?
I said Nasha hasn't joined us. But you can start.
Okay. Okay, shall we wait for? Okay, we can start. Okay, so first of all, I would like to say, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good evening to all our guest speakers and viewers from all over the world. Tehreek-e-Kashmir UK has organized this online conference in honor of the mass rape victims from the twin villages of Kunan and Poshpora. The female of all ages were raped in front of their families by the Indian Army 30 years ago on today's date. But till now, the victims seek justice. But they say justice delayed is justice denied. So not even one single officer has been prosecuted till today's date due to the black laws enforced by India. I'm Rahana Ali, the mediator for today and the information secretary for Tehreek-e-Kashmir UK. We will start the welcome speech by the president of Tehreek-e-Kashmir UK, Fahim Gyani. I would like to apologize in advance in case any name is not pronounced right by me, and would like to remind you that each speaker will be given 5 minutes as we need to cover a lot of speeches today. So could we get started, Fahim Gyani, please?
Thank you, Rehana. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening to everyone, and good morning to former Australian Senator Lee, because it's 5 a.m. in Australia at the moment. First of all, I would like to welcome and thank for your participation in this International Kashmir conference titled Kunan Poshpora, Mass Rape, Denied Justice for 30 years. The mass rape, Kunan Poshpora 1991 is an unforgettable incident in the Kashmir history, which was committed under the Black Rape Law, Armed Forces Special Power Act, ASPA 1990, Section 7, which gives impunity to Indian Army, and the Indian Army is using these powers on the innocent Kashmiris to torture, kill, rape, and burn properties, even on suspicion. Most females in Kashmir have suffered in the hands of Indian Army, especially in the last 30 years due to the black laws. Justice delayed is justice denied. So I would appeal the world governments and citizens to stand up and support humanity before they may lose trust in human as been waiting since decades. The mass rape victims are still alive, but living dead has been suffering psychologically along their family, and as they were gang raped in front of their families, but no help or support has been provided till today after 30 years have passed. The Indian government refuses to acknowledge its crimes. India should be sanctioned for its war crimes and illegal laws in illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. We must never forget the horror unfolded on the victims of Kunan Poshpora. We must never forgive. We must never forget. Freedom for all, freedom for Kashmir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fahim Gyani. The first guest I would like to call upon is Dr. Farhan Chak. He is a Kashmiri lobbyist and a researcher. Dr. Fahim Chak, please.
Farhan Chak.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and virtually meet with everybody. I'd like to thank Fahim Gyani Saab for organizing this important and timely conference on what is a very difficult moment in not just Kashmir's history, I believe the collective conscience of the world community. You see, injustice anywhere, it's a crime everywhere. It should be a crime everywhere. And certainly the impact of an injustice of this and of such a magnitude cannot be but felt, not just for the generations in the area or the place in which the crime has been committed, but for generations beyond and all over the globe. Now, I grew up in a house in which my family was forcibly evicted from its lands in Jammu and had to migrate to Azad Kashmir. And the stories that my parents told me, the crimes that were committed against the Kashmiris, almost up to about 250,000 people were killed during that time. And what was particularly grotesque and scarring is the abuse and the targeting of women and children during this conflict. Kunan Poshpora is not an isolated incident. As grotesque as it is, when every single woman and girl child was gang raped, it's an affront to anyone's conscience that how could any individual, let alone standing army, commit such brazen crimes. And not only have they denied it, not a single person has been held accountable for these crimes. So I believe that that's exactly what needs to be done. The 4th Rajputana Rifles, and everyone should be very clear, the 4th Rajputana Rifles of the 68th Brigade of the Indian Army were the culprits that committed these sick, grotesque crimes. Now, we may think that we can keep silent and bury this, but it will not go away. And, you know, injustice has that kind of impact, social impact on society, that no matter how deep you try to bury it, it's going to remain. And it's like pushing down on a spring, that the more effort you exert, the more force is pushed back towards you. And one day, 1,000-fold, it blows up in your face. And that's exactly what's happening inside the disputed territory at this moment. And of course, it's a very somber time to recall such a tragic event, but we need to move forward and think about actionable actions that we should take in response to the criminals that are still alive and walking free. They must be felt, not just for the cause of justice for Kashmiris, but globally. Those criminals must be felt that they will not escape justice. And that should be the main target of what we try to collectively do. Name and shame and start legal proceedings against all those individuals that were responsible for those crimes. I believe that's the way to move forward. And that's the way that you can actually try to reconcile and rebalance the crimes that were committed. Because when any injustice happens, it actually upsets the balance in the social, cultural ecosystem in society. And what is required, and this was the logic behind the peace and reconciliation movement and drive. And this is behind the logic of, Professor Johan Galtung's Transform initiative, is how to kind of rebalance society. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about rebalancing and making sure that the criminals are held to account. So I just wanted to make those few brief comments, and I thank you very much for this opportunity, and I look forward to listening to the rest of you.
Thank you. The next guest we are going to call upon is actually a Kashmiri lobbyist as well and a researcher, and her name is Shaista Safi. Shaista Safi, please. Do we have Shaista Safi here?
Thank you, Rehana.
Okay,
can you hear me?
You're welcome. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to Fahim Kiani Saab as well for organizing this event and for inviting me here. Whenever we recall this day, this Kunan Poshpora incident that happened, this day is a lesson for all those who even still today call Indian occupational forces as Indian security forces. It is a reminder for them that these occupational forces are not their duty and kill, their duty make people disappear, and their duty even is to rape. So this is a reminder for all those who even till today call them as security forces. So this Kunan Poshpora incident, where Fahim Kiani Saab mentioned this history in his introductory remarks, this incident is like something that reminds us what occupation is all about, how people grow in occupation. Farhan Sheikh Saab was describing how people, how his journey, how his family's journey began. Same is the case with most of the people in Kashmir. They grow up with this occupation, they grow in this occupation. Their resilience with their growth is growth in their resilience as well. All we see as a child in Kashmir is rape, is torture, are mass killings, mass graves. We grow up not with the stories of Cinderella or Rapunzel, but the stories of what happened to women in Kunan Poshpora, what happened to Asiya and Nilofer, and what happened to Asifa. And all those names we don't know because most of the cases, most of the horrendous crimes are not reported, because we know what happened when these cases are reported. It's just the name and shame, and those who commit this crime, they are not being held accountable, because Armed Forces Special Power Act, Public Safety Act, they
Are you still there, Shaista Safi? I think there is some
and we need to
kind of a
remind
maybe
people that
issue,
in
so we
that
can't hear
so-called
Shaista Safi at the moment.
can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can hear you now.
I've just turned off my video because my internet is really bad here. So I was just saying that people say that Kashmir has been enjoying that special so-called status, but we need to remind people that in that so-called special status, more than 10,000 women have been raped, and so many have been made half widows. So when now we don't have that so-called social special status, we fear what India can do to us and what India can do to the women of Kashmir, especially after BJP leaders have been saying so many times openly that what they dream about white, fair Kashmiri women. So we have to keep
I think Shaista, you're having problem with your... Okay.
We have to remember the faces and name and shame those who have committed these crimes, and remember the faces and the names of those who have been the victim and the survivor of this occupation. We need to remind the world what Kashmiri women have been suffering since ages, and especially what they can suffer after this Article 370 and 35A has been abolished. Because we know the BJP and their sinister crimes and their sinister plans against Kashmir, and especially against the Kashmiri woman. After we hear that even in a public gathering, they say that they want to marry white, fair-skinned Kashmiri woman. So we remember these names, and we'll let people of the world know about the sinister plans BJP and
Shaista, are you still there?
She's dropped
Hello,
out of the
Shaista?
call, Rihanna. She's dropped out of the call.
Yeah, because that's what I was just waiting for her. Okay, while Shaista will be coming back to us, I would like to call upon our third guest. She's the member of the British Parliament, Nasha. Is Nasha here? I would like to call upon Nasha. Once again, could I call upon Nasha, please? Okay, seems like Nasha is not here, so we are going to be moving on. So the next guest I'm going to call upon is going to be Lee Rhiannon. I would like to call her. She is a former senator from the Australian Parliament, and she's the first senator to speak for Kashmir in Australia, and she's a human rights activist as well.
Thank you to the organisers for holding this important event.
Is Lee Rhiannon here?
Yes, can you hear me?
Thank you.
Thank you to the organisers
Yes,
for
I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the organisers for holding this important event, and I do endorse the comments of the previous speakers. I am joining you from Australia. When we start our speeches here, we acknowledge the traditional owners, the Aboriginal people, peoples of the First Nations, and pay tribute to their history, their culture, and their ongoing battle for justice. In many ways, the struggles of Australia's First Nations are not dissimilar to those of Kashmiri. Rape is a shocking crime. For centuries, rape has been a tactic of war used to denigrate, violate, and humiliate women, and through them, their whole communities. In my speech, I do apologise for any incorrect pronunciation I might have. On the 23rd of February 1990, 31 years ago, the villages of Kunan and Poshpora became part of the notorious history that now dogs India with regard to the sexual violence that is committed so often by their forces. We've heard from other speakers about the shocking crimes that occurred in these villages 31 years ago. These rapes were pre-planned. Women, nearly 100, from the very young, 13 years, to the very old, about 80, were systematically raped by 125 personnel of the 4th Rajputana Rifles, members of the Indian Army. The two villages where those crimes occurred were barricaded for 4 days. It's just unimaginable to think what happened in that time. This is not just a history of brutality and criminality. It's also a story of courage and perseverance shown by the women of those villages as they pursue the perpetrators through district, supreme, and high courts of India. Tragically, the shocking crimes inflicted on the women of Kunan and Poshpora are not an exception. It must be acknowledged that they are in keeping with the character of the Indian Army. A Médecins Sans Frontières report has found that Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir has one of the highest rates of sexual violence in the world. Similarly, a study published by the Australian National University Press entitled Cascades of Violence, War, Crime and Peace Building Across South Asia reveals that Indian military forces have raped more than 11,000 women in Jammu and Kashmir. Most critically, a culture of impunity prevails. Indian laws effectively allow military personnel to get away with rape, murder, and many other crimes. The Armed Forces Special Powers Act and the Armed Forces Jammu and Kashmir Special Powers Act 1990 are the vehicles that enable Indian military forces to commit shocking crimes without the threat of charges and jail. Professor Rashida Manjul, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, has found that these laws result in a lack of accountability and redress for the victims of human rights violations. She especially emphasised how the 1950 Army Act, and I quote, limits the scope for civil courts to consider allegations of violence against women perpetrated by army officials, including killings and sexual violence. The women of Kashmir have stood tall and strong against the horrendous crimes they and their communities endured today. Today, the 23rd of February, is Kashmiri Women's Resistance Day to commemorate the crimes that occurred in the villages of Kunan and Poshpora and to celebrate the courage and determination of all Kashmiri women. Since Delhi took over total control of Jammu and Kashmir in August 2018, the global movement for self-determination for Kashmiris has grown in numbers and voice. I think it is vital that our work needs to put more focus on the gender aspects of the violence perpetrated by the Indian occupying forces in Jammu and Kashmir. Today's forum is an important step in this process. Marking Kashmir Women's Resistance Day with this event helps highlight the crimes against women and children, human rights abuses, and violations of international humanitarian laws by the Indian forces. And I do wish to warmly congratulate the organisers of this forum. While it was the 125 members of the 4th Rajputana Rifles, and they must be held to account for their crimes in the two villages, we must remember that the crimes of the 23rd of February 1990 were an act of state terrorism in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. To achieve self-determination for Kashmir, the crimes of the Indian military need to be exposed and they must be held account nationally and internationally. Thank you. That's all.
You're welcome, and I would like to thank you for your brief speech on this topic. It was really nice to hear from you. The next person I'm going to call upon is going to be once again Nasha, MP of the British Parliament. Is Nasha still there? Okay, it says I can see a message from her saying that she would not. She's busy at the moment, so she will be joining us soon. Okay, while we're actually waiting for Nasha, I would like to call upon my next guest, which is Mary Hunter, a researcher and writer on South Asian communities, especially Pakistan. Mary Hunter, please.
Hi there. Thank you ever so much for inviting me to this conference, and it's a real pleasure to share this platform with such accomplished and passionate panelists. I'd like to begin by providing some context to the Kunan Poshpora incident that happened on this day in 1991. Human Rights Watch published a book entitled Abdication of Responsibility, The Commonwealth and Human Rights. The point of this was to acknowledge human rights abuses by Commonwealth member states and to enhance their ability to prevent and tackle these abuses. In dealing with only 9 of the 50 member states, Human Rights Watch singled out India for firing at and killing civilians in Kashmir. But this book also specifically mentions the Kunan Poshpora incident, which occurred the same year the book was published. Human Rights Watch suspected that between 23 and 100 women in these villages had been raped on the 23rd of February. Suggesting that this incident was an example of where the government failed to properly investigate human rights abuses by its armed forces. This was exemplified by a report conducted by Chief Justice Faruqi, who found that the initial police investigation not only commenced late, but that the whole case was unprecedented because, and I quote, normal investigative procedures were ignored. Following the work of a committee, they suggested that the allegations made by the women were baseless and potentially even false accusations made under pressure from militants. Human Rights Watch thus concluded that the committee was far more concerned about countering domestic and international criticism than about uncovering the truth, because of the failure to follow proper investigative procedure. Despite repeated attempts for a reinvestigation, justice still has not been served for those women. They suffer not only psychologically as a consequence of rape, but also socially as they are ostracized in their local communities for their allegations. There are also few measures in place to support those women through their trauma. Though it is important to highlight historical human rights abuses, sexual violence in Indian-administered Kashmir is not just a thing of the past. The first report by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on Kashmir in 2018 stated that allegations of sexual violence by security forces personnel, including in the Kunan Poshpora incident, have not been independently investigated nor prosecuted. Indeed, the report found it gravely concerning that it could not investigate incidents of sexual violence since July 2016 due to the lack of access granted by the Indian government. It has been repeatedly suggested by Human Rights Watch that rape has been used as a weapon of war by the Indian security forces against the entire Kashmiri community. For the loved ones of the survivors of sexual violence are heavily impacted too, and rape is viewed as a means of suppressing and desecrating the spirit of the Kashmiri people. Rape as a weapon against women was most common when security forces were conducting cordon and search operations, meaning that incidents like Kunan Poshpora are the consequences of reprehensible abuses of power, abuses which have gone unpunished, with the second UN report published in 2019 stating that no progress has been made in bringing justice. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, it has been easy to feel helpless about many things. It might be easy to feel the same way about the situation in Kashmir, particularly as women in Kunan and Poshpora might be constantly reliving their trauma. But what we can say is that these women are not alone. This conference is just one example of people internationally standing united to raise not only awareness of these violations, but to raise our voices against oppression. As outsiders looking in on the Kashmir conflict, there are a number of things that we can do. Firstly, we must dismantle any barriers between ourselves and others, which lead us to believe that suffering is only real and tangible when it is experienced by those close to us. If an incident of alleged mass rape occurred in the UK and no justice was served, activists, journalists, and politicians would never fall silent. So why should those outside Kashmir fall silent while the security forces continue to violate with impunity? I'm repeatedly asked why, as a Brit, I have an interest in Kashmir, as if it is strange to feel for people other than my own. But suffering is suffering no matter where it occurs. Belonging to the people targeted is not a necessary prerequisite to caring or to activism. Secondly, in this spirit, if we have the ability to raise awareness of the human rights abuses in Indian-administered Kashmir, then we should. Unfortunately, these abuses are not limited to sexual violence, but also include enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings, torture, and restrictions on freedom of speech and expression. Many of us are protected against such egregious violations, for which we should be grateful but not take it for granted. Write and speak out against restrictions on rights in Kashmir. Join international initiatives to collectively raise awareness and lobby human rights organizations. And most importantly, educate, because if these violations were discussed more openly among the general public, there would be far more outrage and far more action. Finally, we cannot forget the suffering experienced by the women of Kunan and Poshpora, nor all Kashmiris who have suffered for the past 70 years. The only things worse than the actual human rights abuses is the failure to see justice done and to allow their suffering to be in vain. So each of us should continue to raise awareness, because no matter how small each act feels, it makes a difference to those who have suffered to know that they have not been forgotten. To the survivors of persecution in Kashmir, we hear you, and to the perpetrators of persecution, we see you. Thank you so much.
Many thanks. The next guest we would like to call upon is Alf Selenkov, international journalist and works for Amnesty International UK. So could we call upon Alf Selenkov, please? Do we have Alf Selenkov here, please?
Thank you. Thank you so much, dear moderator.
welcome.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me right now? My name is Elif.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, thank you so much. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thank you. I kindly welcome all of you, honorable guests. Rape and sexual abuse have been used as weapons of war throughout the history. And the lack of stability and security, especially in war-torn countries like Syria or Bosnia or Kashmiri region as well, leaves women and girls in particular more vulnerable than ever to violence. But for a long time, it was just accepted that this was inevitable, where conflict was happening, and then few efforts were made to prosecute perpetrators for mass rapes and sexual violence. As you know, the Geneva Convention has in theory protected individuals from rape and threatened acts of violence in conflict zones since 1949. But when we see Kashmiri Kunan Poshpora region, this mass rape happened in 1991. So only in 1998 did the United Nations pass a resolution classing sexual violence in conflict, including rape, as a war crime. So United Nations also is classing rape and sexual violence, including rape, as a war crime. But we know that most women and girls do not report when they have been raped, whether due to the stigma or victim blaming, and sometimes the possibility of being killed on behalf of honor, for the honor of family, and due to the lack of faith in the justice system as well. So national justice system around the world really have largely failed survivors of sexual violence. And as we know, since the World War II, there has been little improvement in acknowledging the gravity of rape as a wartime abuse, and as demonstrated by the fact that it still goes largely unpunished, unfortunately. Why this happened? Why those kind of barbaric people, they are using women? Because women are seen as the reproducers and the carers of the community, of course. And therefore, if one group wants to control another group, another country, another region, they often do this controlling by impregnating of the women of the other communities. And because they see it as a way of destroying the opposing community. And in Kunan Poshpora, survivors face emotional torment, psychological damage, as we know, and physical injuries as well, other disease, and many others. We can list a lot of consequences that devastate their lives. So when we look at the history of 20th century, again, there is no difference between Kunan Poshpora and Srebrenica genocide. Srebrenica genocide happened in Bosnia and Herzegovina during Bosnian War between 1992 and 1995. And during Bosnian War, only in Srebrenica is a city of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Only in this city, almost 200 women, mostly Bosnian Muslim, it is called Bosniak, they were subjected to sexual violence during the war. So that's why always Kunan Poshpora reminds me of Srebrenica genocide and the sexual violence of Bosnian Muslim women during the war. Really, their stories, of course, have largely remained untold. Again, as I said before, due to the stigma, due to the shame, or the ongoing struggle to rebuild lives devastated by sexual violence. When I was in Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example, in 2012, for an interview, I met with the president of Srebrenica Mothers Associations. She told me that, sorry, excuse me. She told me that the head of the president of, thank you. President of the Srebrenica Mothers Association, she told me, look, my sister Elif, nowhere was the gendered nature of violence more obvious and devastating than in the systematic use of rape as a weapon of war. And they killed our men deliberately, and they raped us deliberately as well, because it is the systematic use of rape as a weapon of war, she told me. And she continued like that. They tell us that rape happens in every war, and that tile armies commit rape, but this aggression, this genocide that happened, rape of Bosnian Muslim women, cannot be compared with an act of war or aggression. It had to be one big project that include planners, commanders, and executors. And simply, rape was used as a weapon for ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing, it is very really touching word, ethnic cleansing and genocide as well. So you see how rape can be used for ethnic cleansing and as a tool of genocide. Really, if there is sexual violence in one society, the world is like big multicultural, like big and multicultural village, like we see due to the COVID-19. If there is one corruption in one society, we see the echoes of that corruption everywhere. For example, in the UK, I'm living in London, and we see the echoes of the sexual violence here in the UK. We may live in a relatively peaceful society, but with 2 women a week in the UK, 2 women a week killed by men, and approximately 85,000 women per year subjected to sexual violence by their family or non-family members. It is clear that peacetime does not reap equal dividends between the sexes. And I also suggest you a published book. Many of you probably know. It was published 2016. It is called Do You Remember Kunan Poshpora? In this book, amongst many gory accounts, and one of the survivors shares her story. She says that 3 army men caught hold of me, and 8-10 army men raped me in terms. They had huge battery torches with them, and they used them to see my naked body while making lewd remarks. And another survivor in this book also says, we knew that if we remained silent, they would do it again. If not in our village, then somewhere else. So the name of this book is Do You Remember Kunan Poshpora? I suggest many of you, if you have time, it is really, really very historical and touching and very important book about this issue, Kunan Poshpora. Before finishing, I just want to say truth has a peculiar nature and it cannot be defeated. And every act of tyranny and or deprivation of justice has the power to haunt and not only the offenders, but also us as a big society. And today I talk of the winning the hearts of Kashmiri population as a Turkish journalist living in London, and my Kashmiri sisters as well, winning the hearts of my Kashmiri sisters, and also informing other people. So thank you so much for inviting me on the Day of Solidarity. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Many thanks for your much detailed speech. The next person we would like to call upon is going to be Nasha, a Kashmiri shadow minister and a member of the British Parliament. Nasha, are you here?
She's not here.
Okay, if Nasha's not here, then we can wait and I can call the next guest. The next guest I'm going to call upon is Shafaq Mohammed, former member of European Parliament. Shafaq Mohammed, please.
Thank you, Rehan, and thank you, Fahim, Kenny, and other colleagues for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak on this day, which is
You're welcome.
23rd of February, Kashmiri Women's Resistance Day. I want to particularly thank Rhiannon from Australia. I know exactly how you feel, Rhiannon, in terms of the time zone. I was on a call with a colleague of yours, Senator Janet Rice, and it was 5 o'clock your time and 4 o'clock UK time. So I know what the personal sacrifice you are making. And as a Kashmiri, I want to thank you for that sacrifice, but more importantly, taking an active interest in the issue of women's rights, and in particular, the issue of this horrific incident. This is something close to my heart. I served in the European Parliament on the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, and clearly sexual violence in conflict is a huge issue right across the world. Not many people would have heard of this area. I only know the names, I don't know the geography, but I can tell you this is akin to the My Lai massacre that happened during the Vietnam War. And I think we need to draw parallels to this. So when we talk to our non-Kashmiri friends and we want to describe this incident, I think we should use that horrific incident as described by many as the most shocking episode of the Vietnam War to say, just as you were horrified by what happened when those American soldiers ran amok, murdering, but also gang raping Vietnamese women, that was exactly what happened in this incident in Kashmir on the 23rd of February 1991. The only difference was these were Indian soldiers massacring and actually going around and humiliating the Kashmiri women of these two villages. Clearly, we've got a challenge in our hands because there's denial in India. If you watch Indian news and you watch some of those commentators, they deny that this even ever happened. And this is deliberate because as the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, said, that the perpetrators of human rights abuses and violence want to say to people that nobody cares. And the fact that we are meeting tonight on social media, it sends a clear message to the women of Kashmir that we do care. And it's not just Kashmiris that care. It's people like Lee, it's people like Mary, it's people like Elfie, I think it was, sorry if I could pronounce your name wrong, from Turkey, that people across the world care. And we should all care, no matter where we are. I care about what happened in the Congo in terms of women being raped there. I care about what happened in Darfur as well, and also the catalogue of violence that happened in the Balkans in Europe, in particular Bosnia. We should care about that as well. And I think we should reach out to those campaigns to actually work together and say, we want to stop violence. And just because of passage of time doesn't mean that those monsters in uniform that committed this crime can now live a life of respectability in retirement, because that's probably where they are, most of these people. So we need to, and I plead to people from Kashmir is, please seek out who the commanding officers were and all the other people there. If we do have intelligence, let's use social media to name these monsters that may well be living in India. And if they ever dare to travel outside after COVID, i.e. to United Kingdom, then I would be asking Fahim Kayani to lead a campaign to tell the Home Office that we do not want perpetrators of gang violence and gang rape to be given access and to visit the United Kingdom. And we need to hold the Indian government to account, because at the moment, the Indian government wants to be respected internationally. It wants to be a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And my view is, in order to be a member of some body like the United Nations Security Council, the first and foremost thing should be you should respect the United Nations resolutions, but also you need to respect not only the resolutions around Kashmir, but also UN Resolution 1820 that was passed in 2008 in relation to women, peace and security, that protected women. And I know in 2014, there was a special conference held where William Hague, who was a foreign minister of the United Kingdom, but also Angelina Jolie, came together to actually look at the global summit to end sexual violence in conflict. And we need to remind these people, particularly Angelina Jolie, to say, you came to the United Kingdom, what work have you done around this issue in Kashmir? Because it's not only this village, there's many other incidents as well. So we've got to keep up the pressure. And once again, I just want to thank the speakers, particularly the non-Kashmiri speakers, for your interest. It really gives me heart to carry on campaigning when I know that friends from across the world are working together. Maybe, Lee, we could actually involve Senator Janet Rice in this, because she's taken active interest alongside me in the Indian Citizens Amendment Act. I think this is also just as important as that. So thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to speak, and my 5 minutes are over.
Thank you. Many thanks for your speech. The next guest we would like to call upon is Turki Orhan, a Turkish author and songwriter, and he's been writing a lot of songs for Kashmir. Many thanks.
Okay, first of all, I'm really happy to join this occasion, and anytime I join these webinars, I learn a lot from the participants, something new about Kashmir as well. So for today, we're going to talk about something very sad, and although I started paying attention to Kashmir issue for several months, I always learn something tragic about Kashmir. And it is really sad that, the world has not heard enough about what happened in these two villages. And I believe that, we need to have more powerful voice to tell all these tragic incidents that happened in the history. I want to refer to Frantz Fanon. As you know, he was an important writer, and he's regarded as one of the founders of post-colonial literature or post-colonial studies. And what he says, he also searched about the women victimized by the colonizers, especially in Algeria, when Algeria was occupied by France. So again, what happened to the women? Unfortunately, some women were targeted, and because those women, for example, were wearing headscarf or veil because of their Islamic identity, as headscarf was targeted. But later, as Frantz Fanon said, this time the women's veil became a symbol for the struggle, and it became a part of the liberation struggle. So, of course, Elif Hanım, from Turkey, she also mentioned about the stigma of the women and their families. So, especially in conservative society, it's not very easy, to reveal what happened to the women. But here we see that women were brave enough to go forward and to reveal the brutalities of Indian soldiers, have done. And without courage, there is no way to face with that. But after this, the things are not finished. When you think about these women, their psychology, their dreams, I believe that for many years, I mean, even today, when you think about the survivors, when you try to put yourself in the shoes of the survivors, I mean, still, it should be something very difficult to bear, So it's not that easy. And as far as I know, in all religions and beliefs, normally even when you have a war with another country, you cannot touch women, you cannot touch elderly people. I mean, still, you shouldn't give, I mean, in our own belief in Islam, even you don't have the right to give a harm to the trees, to the plants. So it's not only in Geneva Convention, but in the old traditions of, mankind, this kind of behavior is never tolerated. But unfortunately, when the colonizer goes to a country, they want to show that they have got supremacy, or they've got, the right to control that land. And sometimes just they are trying to do it, on women. And this is, what we see here, what happened here. So, there's so many stories about Kashmir. So that's why when I start my songs, in the first place, I'm a story writer. And every time I say, like, which story can I tell? Or I will tell you a story now, because these stories are endless. There's so many stories, so many sad stories emerging from Kashmir. And just I'm sometimes trying to cover. And those days, to be honest, I've got a new idea, especially to dedicate a song to the women or mothers, oppressed mothers of the world, by giving a special space to Kashmiri mothers, who lost their children, who lost their sons, and of course the women who have suffered, a lot from all these tragic incidents. So what we can do, of course, we're going to come together, and we need to name and shame, the people, the perpetrators of this incident. And for that, of course, we need to use social media actively. When something happens in a country, if we don't have enough courage to raise our voice, I believe that we are also, unfortunately, we are getting involved in this crime. So if we have conscience, we are going to go forward, and we will try to do something. Yeah, thank you for inviting me, for this occasion. Yeah, that's all.
Many thanks, brother. Before I call our next guest, I would just remind our respectable guests that if we can all please take 5 minutes, otherwise then the whole conference will be prolonged. So the next guest I would like to call upon is Tamkeen Sheikh, ex-Conservative parliamentary candidate. Tamkeen Sheikh, please.
Thank you, organizers, and especially thank you to Fahim Kayani and the moderator Rehana for inviting me to this conference. I feel very honored to be a part of it. Firstly, I would start with...
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I would like to start with saying one thing, that it has been 73 years since we have got independence. Since 73 years, Kashmir has been a region where atrocities after atrocities are happening. And I'm really saddened, and it is heartbreaking to see these atrocities against women and children. I think the time is now that we say no, and we say that it needs to stop. We are living in 21st century, and still we have not learned from our past. I'm not sure why and where humanity is gone, that we are not able to recognize that these atrocities against humankind needs to stop. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that yes, these atrocities are happening across the region, but the thing that we are forgetting to address is the social impact and the impact that it makes on several individuals, making them very vulnerable. And that actually affects a whole community at large. And not only highlighting one community, we will be talking about all the communities that are involved in that region that are going to be massively affected, and affected in a way that people are going to get more involved in activities that are going to lead communities into a negative direction. So the one thing that I want to say is that it is high time that we bring human beings together, instead of thinking that this region or that region or this community or that community or this religion and that religion. I'm absolutely against talking about one particular religion or one particular community. It is high time that we behave like human beings. We come together as human beings and work together, each and every individual. Stand up against people who are involved in these kind of atrocities, have our voice heard, and that's what exactly this platform is doing and this organization is trying to do. And I am really thankful that people are standing up against this cause. So I'm not going to take a lot of time. The conclusion that I want to make is the time is now to say no to these atrocities, and they should stop now. Thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks. The next guest I'm going to call upon is Shani Hamid, and she's the International Human Rights Council Ambassador. Shani Hamid, please.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me in this very important meeting. My dear brothers and sisters in Kashmir and everybody else. Hello. Today, I would like to pay my heartfelt tribute and offer my prayers to the mass rape victims in Kunan and Poshpora villages in Indian occupied Kashmir. Many will remember these brutal mass rapes took place 30 years ago, exactly today, in 23rd February 1991, and the torture towards these vulnerable villages in Indian occupied Kashmir being led by some Indian army members under a name of Operation and under a reasoning called India's Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Well, so during that unfortunate night, some army personnel of India have raped all the women aged between 8 to 75 years old in these poor and helpless villages. This brutal human rights abuse has lasted all night long. And this brutal human rights abuse has been done by some uniforms representing India. The United Nations member, United Nations Security Council member India, which has signed the United Nations Genocide Convention in 1949 and ratified the same convention in 1959. Yes, the very same country which ratified the Geneva Convention in 1950 as well. But alas, all these agreements did not stop some of the members from Indian Army from committing genocide in 23rd February 1991. The tragic reality is, when the United Nations adopted the Genocide Convention in 1948, has clearly defined the meaning of genocide in its Article 2, stating as any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about this physical distraction, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring the children of the group to another group is genocide. Of course, we are well aware about the cunning tactics towards eliminating a nation's core moral and values. Plus, we are well aware of issues of sinister rape and torture's purpose, which aiming to destroy those generations to come. After all, the damages of rape or sexual assault to victims are also the damages intending to destroy the health of the society. To summarize about the damages caused by rape or sexual assault, we can remember that psychologically, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, irritability, low self-esteem, eating disorders, sleeping disorders or insomnia, school or professional difficulties, addictions for alcohol, drugs, and anything bad, psychiatric diseases, and suicide can surface in the victim's life. Then the physical consequences the victims will have is also numerous. I could give you a few examples, such as gastric pains, abdominal pains, nausea, vomiting, indigestion, intestinal bloating, obesity, diabetes, epilepsy, sexually transmitted diseases, and the cancer comes from the sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy, and more. Eventually, deliberately applying such brutality to individuals or to targeted groups is a war crime. Is that genocide? Is against the Geneva Convention? Is against the Genocide Convention? Is against the human rights principle, which has been accepted by United Nations. Hence, taking European Union and African peace envoys to Indian occupied Kashmir, then showing them a rosy picture in the region with strictly guided tours will not provide a resolution for the problem, because everything will be well staged. This is why United Nations Security Council should ensure that every one of its members and all UN members, in fact, will honor their signed commitments. Now I urge to my brothers and sisters in Kashmir and to all around the world, please, within the safety, solidarity, and discipline, let's continue to gather our solid evidences against the criminals. Let's avoid extremism when acting for salvation, but please, let's continue to gather our solid evidences with names, pictures, and tags without putting yourself or anyone in danger. Because when we provide our evidences about the ongoing crimes, United Nations Security Council will and should eventually refer the case to ICC. This will happen, I promise. But please, let's gather our solid evidences. Thank you very much indeed.
Hugely welcome. We would like to call upon our next guest. And our next guest is actually Altaf Ahmed Bhatt, but we have just received the apology from the senior Kashmiri Hurriyat leader. So the next person we would like to call upon is Shamim Shawal, General Secretary of Kashmir Tehreek-e-Kashmir. Shamim Shawal, please. Shamim Shawal, are you there?
She is in the conference, Shamim Shol. She just
Hello. Are you listening?
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Dear colleagues, parliamentarians, journalists, social activists, thank you. Thank you, organizers, for inviting me as we are observing Women's Resistance Day, the day when a shameful incident was authored by so-called largest democracy of the world in the darkness of 22nd and 23rd of February 1991 in Kunan Poshpora. This incident continues to haunt all human rights and women rights activists and international conscience. Let me start with these words which I received from Kashmiri photojournalists, that there is nothing for Kashmiri women to celebrate, only death of their children and humiliation. According to the local reports, at that time when Kunan Poshpora happened, nobody was allowed to visit the Kunan Poshpora. The local reports in the year 1991, on the night of February 2023, Indian troops of 5th Rajputana Rifles raped 30 women in Kunan Poshpora in Kupwara, aged between 18 to 85 years. I was in Kashmir at that time when Kunan Poshpora occurred. The information about this gruesome act was not allowed to trickle out till some witnesses of the incident brought it to the notice of the people outside these villages. I was the first person to report it to the United Nations Human Rights Commission. An FIR was not allowed to be filed as a local administration was disallowed to take notes. Later on 8th March, FIR was lodged. What happened that dark night is recorded in this book. If you can see, do you remember Kunan Poshpora? This is an effort
we can see
made by the young girls of the Kashmiri diaspora in different parts of the world and the women in Srinagar, Sopore and Kupwara, and they managed to reach those who were humiliated and raped. The women of Kashmir continue to resist the occupation of their land and their bodies in their everyday lives. Every home in Kashmir has a tale of the price that has been paid in the quest for freedom. Since 2014, the women of Kashmir have named February 23rd as Kashmiri Women's Resistance Day towards keeping alive the memories of what happened in Kunan Poshpora and subsequently in many other incidents of rape and murder of Kashmiri women. Rape continues to be a weapon of intimidation in conflict zones around the world, leaving a trail of communities buried in shame. I will suggest, because the time is limited, I will suggest to this forum, to these parliamentarians, that justice continues to be denied and delayed in the victims of Kunan Poshpora. Killing continues to crush the voices of masses. Their voices is heard here in this webinar. We declare that Kashmir belongs to Kashmiris and they are the masters of their destination. Torture continues to be promoted and women continues to resist repression, occupation, humiliation, and intimidation. There is no option in our struggle except to resist the occupation. What Gandhi said about the British occupation, I quote, I discovered that I have no rights as a man because I am an Indian. The same can be said by any Kashmiri that they have no rights under Indian occupation. Everybody knows army has power. They have guns. They use it to create fear and silence the people. Today, we demand justice for Kunan Poshpora, for broken hearts and disabled children who lost their eyesight. Today, we demand compensation treatment for the traumatized women. We need to present the case in its right perspective and do not add to the truth. What happened to the survivors of the mass rape? We demand international commission to investigate all the cases. I suggest to my sisters, these speakers to come forward and join the hands of International Women Education on Kashmir so that we can reach the international community through you, because you are living in different important posts in different parliamentarians. We have a little voice. We want to make it very strong. You know, the survivors said that when I was in Kashmir, they said to some people who visited from India, but they were not allowed to tell the story to the masses or to the reporters or to the media which was present in India. The Women Initiative was the first group from Indian civil society who recorded these survivors' stories. Therefore, we had to create friends among the diaspora and in different parts of the world to give voice to the voiceless. Thank you very much.
Many thanks for your detailed speech. The next guest I would like to call upon is Dr. Arch Franco Kolozo, and she's a Turkish writer and a human rights activist and has been given the title of Ambassador of Peace. So could I call please Dr. Arch Franco Kuzoloko.
Franca Colozzo.
Sorry about that.
Italian, huh? Not no, I am not Turkish, but Italian.
Oh, sorry about that. I think while I was writing information down.
In truth, I was working 7 years in Istanbul. That's why biraz Türkçe konuşuyorum. Then I really very quickly.
Merhaba. Merhaba.
Merhaba Franco, seni seviyoruz.
Hoş geldin.
Merhaba canlarım. Bye.
Hoş bulduk. Nasılsın? İyi misin? Okay.
4 kişi olduk. Türkiye'den 4 kişi olduk.
The singer, beautiful songs I've heard. Anyway, I wanted to introduce very quickly. I don't want to speak about the incident. I have written a lot, so you have described everything very well. First of all, thank you for inviting me, Tehreek-e-Kashmir, UK, since I consider you the most active pro-Kashmir organization. As an ambassador of peace on behalf of the INSPAD, the Institute of Peace and Development, and the CEO of its sister company, International Harmony Council on Interfaith and Religious Harmony, I am really honored tonight to find myself in the presence of such distinguished activists in support of Kashmir. Mine is not the usual speech on that troubled country about which I have written so many articles, petitions, letters to the powerful of the world, poems, and even a hymn. Mine is meant to be a speech denouncing a stalemate, also due to the differences among the various organizations that use Kashmir for other purposes, boasting successes over the suffering of a people who have languished for years. My bitterness comes from past experiences, disappointments that have been added over time, while the situation in Kashmir has persisted for 73 years under the indifferent eyes of the UN and of the world. With the due exceptions that I know, of course, such as Tehreek and Kashmir, UK, and my organization, ISPAD, I feel like a cry of alarm. Here is my dilemma in offering you today my activism of 2 years of continuous hard work, writing articles. I have posted everything you can check in the chat, and participating in Zoom meetings. But I know it's not enough. Then what is the necessary recipe behind the solution of the age-old question? The latest events in Kashmir coincide for me with my passion for human rights, peace, and especially social justice, values on which I have based all my life choices so far. Attending today a forum about the usual questions relating to the age-old affair of Kashmir, I am introducing a new thought. Why is this situation still pending? Is it just the Indian curfew starting from the 5th August 2019, or the inaction of men? Is it the fault of the UN and of the whole deaf and blind world, not only for Kashmir, but for Syria, Yemen, Palestine, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on? The list of unsolved issues is too long to dwell on them. Well, beyond the UN resolutions pending since 1948, in the face of recent developments in the Kashmiri question and the repeal of Articles 370 and 35A, which conferred the special status on Kashmir in the Constitution, in the face of violence, abuses, also in the destruction of crops and fruit trees by the Indians, together with rapes, kidnappings, killings, imprisonment of Kashmiri journalists and politicians, and so on. Today, we are facing a clear worsening after 73 years of a general situation. Letters sent to the powerful of the world seemed useless, petition the same. Well, what is the end of the tunnel of this stagnant situation? Let's do an examination of conscience. Corruption and misuse of the Kashmiri problem, used as a flag by many politicians and no politicians, were the worst enemies of the Indians themselves, to push the forces at stake towards a common solution. Corruption, the thirst for power or money, were the worst enemies of the Kashmiris themselves. If the pro-Kashmir peace organization move against each other, what do you expect to achieve? If then within Kashmir itself, the corruption of local politicians, together with mafia or terrorist groups often welcomed by corrupt Kashmiri fringes, pushes groups of disparate people toward the diaspora, how can we expect to resolve the age-old question? If the same diaspora of so many Kashmiris, with the replacement of the indigenous demographic groups favored by the PM Modi to remove the cultural roots and tradition of that people, is substituted with bad politics, what could we ever accept? In conclusion, if we really want to see the Kashmir issue resolved, we should join forces, fight corruption, and avoid fighting among ourselves. The beautiful words sometimes uttered in various pro-Kashmiri groups, videos, proclamations, and organizations are useless if not supported by genuine, selfless desire to help the people of Kashmir. We are not here talking either for glory or for personal exhibitionism or for a thirst for power. We are here today to talk about human rights trampled on every day in that country. For this, and only for this reason, we should strip ourselves of the recurring paranoia on social networks, personal ambition, the race for power and the thirst for wealth should never regulate the action of those who stand as champions of peace and the human rights. Thank you.
Many thanks for your detailed speech. Before I call upon our last guest, I would like to pass apology from our second speaker, Shaista Safi, who had a net problem, so she can't actually return to conclude her speech. The last guest we have here is Yahya Akhtar, Director Information Cell, Tehreek-e-Kashmir, UK. Yahya Akhtar, please. Do we have you here? Yahya Akhtar? Okay, yes, I can see you here.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining us this sad occasion. Let me set a couple of things straight for the record. This is 173rd year we're spending under occupation. In 1846, British Raj sold our country, whole country, to a warlord who helped East India Company to occupy the subcontinent lands. They received only 7,500,000 rupees, Nanak Shai of that time, which today I would say is 220 rupees against £1. And they gave whole 85,000 square miles country to Gulab Singh as a gift because he helped them to occupy the country. And 1 century later, when British Raj left the subcontinent in 1947, the grandson of the same person were handed over this princely state. At that time, Muslim majority was 77%. And according to that rule, it was going to Pakistan. And this is confirmed in the late documentary of Michael Palin. Everybody can hear that, listen to that. He went to Pakistan, to India, and the Kashmir, and he knows that everybody, even today, even given the chance of the plebiscite according to the United Nations resolution of 1948, everybody will, majority of people will decide to go to Pakistan. And this incident, it happened in the 1991, and two twin villages of Kunan and Poshpora. And it happened in a very organized way. The army cordoned both villages. They assembled the men outside the villages and started raping women. And some of our sisters died the same night, and others died slowly. And some of them are looking at the world today. Where is that Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the 1948 of United Nations? Where is that resolution of United Nations of 1948, which gave them the right of self-plebiscite? And then another dozen of the conventions of human rights. And where is the Human Rights Convention of Europe? And the rest of the sisters, they are looking at the world that all those conventions are very selectively chosen. And Western America is using selectively and bartering against human rights. My sister from Italy, I can tell you that the whole of the Kashmir is under the occupied Indian occupation. The whole of the Kashmir is under a complete lockdown since the 5th of August 2019. There is no corruption, there's no life there even. There is a war throughout the whole line of control, right in the middle of Kashmir, where people of Kashmir are being killed. The war waged by the India. And the world, civilized world conscience is dead at the moment. And the biggest hope is you sisters from Italy, from Turkey, from Australia. And this is the biggest hope, that people will rise up one day and speak up for the human rights. And there is no hope with Europe and America and United Nations. The United Nations is at the moment a little tool in the hands of the Europe and America. They can choose to free South Sudan or East Timor, but choose not to help people of Kashmir. And people of Kashmir are not to blame. We salute our sisters who gave everything and who are standing up there and looking up to the world. Somebody will do something, and this is a great job all our brothers and sisters from all of the world you're doing. Thank you very much once again, and thanks for your support, and we hope that you will continue your support for us. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Thanks for your information and speech. We would like to actually, before we go and conclude this conference, we would like to do a question and answer session. So we would like to call upon Shamim Shaul, if he would like to actually join us with the question and answer session. So anybody has any questions, or anybody would like to come forward, so they actually could answer the questions of some people who don't actually have the whole history, or they would like to know. But I can see that pretty much everybody here today in the conference knows a lot about the incident. Okay, I see that Shamim is actually not here as well. So could we ask anybody who would like to come forward to actually answer any questions that anybody has?
Just a few suggestions. It's not a question. Actually, every participant has already decided, all aspects of this unfortunate incident. But my question is, and as well, suggestion is as well, why this incident took place? Why? The answer is, in a very small area of Kashmir, in between Himalayas, there is a huge presence of Indian military over there. And this military is, they are trying to crush their freedom struggle. The Kashmiri people are demanding their right of self-determination, which is a right of vote. And they are struggling for that right of vote since last 73 years. And Indian Army is just trying to harass our Kashmiri community and just trying to disassociate the Kashmiri people from this freedom struggle, from the right of self-determination, number one. And number two, Rehana, it's a 30 years have been passed so far, and still, the case has been not decided, and the culprits are free. So it is usually said that justice delayed is justice denied. I request the international community, they should must step in. They must pressurize Indian governments wherever they are, wherever in the world. They should must pressurize Indian governments that this case must be decided through free, fair, and impartial, justice. And my last suggestion is, because we are here in British, Rehana, and we are registered voter here, I'm usually saying that we are a member of civilized society. We are the voice of the people of occupied Kashmir. So Britain, we were colony of British, and Britain government oversaw the partition in 1947. So it's their responsibility to right these wrongs. So these are my suggestions. Thank you very much for all participants. Me as a Vice President of Tehreek-e-Kashmir, I really appreciate Mary Hunter and Rehanan and Dr. Colozo and Alif and Tamkeen Sheikh and our poet and our respected Torege. They have very good participation. They have forward very good suggestions, and we should continue our struggle as being human being. A time will come, inshallah, I'm sure a time will come when Indian government will be tried for this war crime. A time will come when Indian so-called democracy will be exposed. A time will come then when the professionalism of Indian army will be exposed in the world. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Aftab Khan. I would like to ask Lee Rhiannon if she would like to actually come forward, because I could see that she had all the information and the whole like the evidence and the whole story, like how it happened. So if you would actually like to like answer some questions, but I can see we have somebody else.
Can I excuse me?
Just 1 minute. Just
excuse me. Can I just say a few words?
One minute.
Practical. Can I just say practical suggestion, please?
Just let Speaker Lee, then you can speak here. Just let you know, she's the first person who raised the Kashmir issue in Australian Parliament. You didn't mention this, so let you know.
Yes.
Okay, Lee.
Look, thank you very much, because I'm certainly happy to do my best to answer questions. I'm not an expert in this field. Look, what I would just like to say, and I hope that it comes up in questions, is that it's wonderful that we have this event, and there are more events being held around the world. But what is happening in India at the moment is deeply shocking, both in Kashmir and so many other areas as well. Building the global movement of support for self-determination for Kashmir, I think, is absolutely critical. And we know that there are many groups that have been doing wonderful work before people like myself learned about this issue, and I acknowledge that very deeply. And therefore, there is different tendencies. I take great inspiration from the campaign to end apartheid in South Africa, where it started off as a very small global campaign. In Australia, it was literally a dozen people just who on Friday nights would come together and walk around in a circle. In time, hundreds of thousands of people, many politicians changed their position. Why was that? That was because of a growing public understanding that racism in South Africa was wrong, that apartheid must end. It was a very simple demand. And I think that's where we need to work as people committed to the crimes that occurred 30 years ago for the women in these two villages, to the ongoing crimes that are committed, the crimes against humanity happening in many parts of India, and particularly targeting the Muslim community. And I think with regard to Kashmir, what unites us is the call for self-determination. Yes, there is different emphasis on how that should happen, but I think it's incredibly important that we take away from this, how do we build a global movement